Good afternoon, Rebecca.
Good afternoon.
For those who may not know your work yet, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Rebecca Zung. I am a family law attorney, but I'm also a best-selling author, a keynote speaker, a podcast host. There are many things that I do, but primarily a family law attorney. Last year, I conceived an idea to create a podcast, and it's called Breaking Free, a Modern Divorce Podcast. Mm-hmm. I call it Breaking Free because that's the name of the book. I wrote a book on divorce called Breaking Free, a step-by-step divorce guide to achieving emotional, physical, and spiritual freedom in 2013. And the book did become an Amazon bestseller, and from there I was able to do a lot of media. I've done a lot of media. I've been on Extra and Dr. Drew and NPR, and I've been quoted in Forbes, Time, Newsweek, Huffington Post, several different outlets. And so the natural next step for me, I thought, was to create my own podcast. I asked Susan Guthrie to be a co-host with me because I thought it would be more interesting than just me talking. And I wanted to have certain episodes where I didn't necessarily have a guest, but where I would just talk about different issues in family law. So she came on board with me, and we launched it at the end of July. As of yesterday, we just went over 750,000 listens. It should be at over 1 million before May, because we're averaging a little over 150,000 listens a month right now. So it's just been really, really incredible. We actually now have paying sponsors, and it's been amazing. It's been amazing. So, it's a constant work, because you have to constantly be thinking about your next episode, your next guest, getting it produced. We do have a sound guy who produces it, adds the intro, the outro, takes out all the barking dogs and ringing phones and things, but which they don't get edited out of YouTube. The YouTube is just the straight thing, but the actual podcast itself is professionally produced. It's been a really, really great way of reaching lots and lots more people. And I would say, for anybody who's interested in marketing themselves, it is the wave of the future. We are getting ready to interview Lily Vasileff on our show, and she's a financial person on CNBC and a whole bunch of different shows. And she was involved somehow with the case of Dirty John, which is now going to be a new series on Netflix. But it started off as a podcast, and the podcast has now been, it's only like 6 or 7 episodes, but it's been listened to like 15 million times since last year. Amazing. So, and from that podcast, a Netflix series came and everything else. So it really is, there's no barrier to entry anymore for getting your message out there. It used to be where you had to get somebody to let you be on TV or whatever. It's no longer the case. There's really no barrier to entry.
You've recently surpassed 750,000 downloads, and you'll soon surpass 1 million. What do you think it is about the content that you create and the message that you give that resonates with so many people?
I think it's a combination of things. First of all, as a veteran divorce attorney, I do know what the hot button issues are in the areas that people are interested in and looking for. But I also think it's, as silly as it may sound, it's like having the right title for the episode. It's having the right SEO for it. It's choosing guests that have their own following, so that there's an interest in what they have to say. Having the top people in the field in the country. We just interviewed Bill Eddy, who's written all the books that people read if they're going through a divorce with a narcissist or a bipolar personality or anything like that. He's the top in the country. We interviewed Amy Baker, who's the top in the country for bipolar personality disorder. in May, I'm doing a divorce summit here in LA, and we have all the best people in the country. Laura Wasser is going to be our guest. We're going to do a live podcast with her, and we're going to do a Ask the Attorney Anything. We have Tammy Leader-Fuller, who's the Emmy-winning former producer of the Today Show, who started Camp Empowerment. She's going to be talking about resilience and reigniting your fire. We have Ariel Laurie, who's married to Chuck Laurie, the big producer, and she also has 250,000 followers on Instagram, and she's her own influencer. She's going to be speaking. I mean, the list of all-stars is amazing. Jen Giamo, who's the personal trainer on Live with Kelly Ripa and Ryan Seacrest, she's going to be doing a transition wellness, like fitness program, teaching people how to be fit even in the midst of trauma. So, but all of that grew out of, my podcast, because these are all people who were guests on my show. And so it's not just a way of reaching more potential clients, which it certainly is that, but it's also a great way to network, because if you want to talk to people, they want to market themselves too. So, it's a great way to say, hey, come on my show, and then you can have a conversation with the person, and then now you are in touch with that person. So I would say it's been a very, very good tool for me.
And I don't know this, but I suspect it might be true. And as someone who's been practicing for a while, you've had the ability to kind of choose your path, and you've been successful at marketing. You've moved to Los Angeles almost 2 years ago now, and last year you launched this incredibly successful podcast. Mm-hmm. What inspires you to kind of continue working so hard and investing so much time in the work and in the conversation that you have?
Because I believe that, I know that divorce is the most traumatic thing that people experience, divorce and death. Number 3 is incarceration. Mm-hmm. So people would rather be incarcerated than deal with divorce or death. And I've been very fortunate to have the training that I've had, and I have the skills. I'm good at what I do, and to access me, it's hundreds of dollars an hour. It's a lot of money if you want to hire me as an attorney, and that goes hand in hand with my level of experience and my skill level and whatever. But you can have access to my information for free on my podcast and in my book. And
I noticed through your website that you're in addition to being an author and then a podcast host, you're now engaging in a form of mediation, and was wondering if you wouldn't mind, kind of sharing your take on mediation.
Sure. I founded a mediation company. We have mediators all over the country that so that we can refer to our Breaking Free Mediation is the name of the company. And the mediators also can do the mediations online through Zoom conferencing, which is great, so that people don't have to sit in traffic to go to there. But it's the very first mindful mediation company in the country. So we offer a mindfulness track. We have meditation specialists that the divorcing clients can work with one-on-one to help them calm themselves, get their head on straight. The divorce paradox is that during the worst, most traumatic time of your life, you have to make the most critical decisions of your life about the things that mean the most to you. Mm-hmm. Your children, your money, your home, your business, your family, all these things. And so getting your head on straight is critical, which is why I created a mindful mediation company. And, it was part of the podcast as well. I just thought the podcast is doing so well that we should be able to help people even further. And we have a medium that can, we can tell people about the company. And so it just made sense. And we created a blueprint for all the mediation centers so that people get the same experience wherever they go. I think that mediation is where everybody should be if they're getting a divorce. I mean, divorce is terrible. I've been through it once myself. I'm happily married to my second husband. We've been married 19 years. I hope we stay married forever. But, you know, I know what it's like. And you don't come out of trial better friends on the other side. And especially if you have children together, even if your children are grown, you still are going to have grandchildren together. You're going to have, you know, you're still going to have to be in each other's lives. And even if you don't have children, why go and spend $100,000 or plus for each of you on attorney's fees to go to trial, to sit in front of a judge who doesn't know either of you, who's just going to make a decision and move on to the next case? The judges have hundreds of cases on their docket. They just want to apply the law and move on. And so I always say there's no justice in divorce. And that's what I think a lot of people are looking for. So it's so much better to go to a mediator. It's private, it's less expensive, you have a lot more control over the outcome. You know, in mediation you can be creative about your settlements. I mean, you can do anything you want as long as it's not illegal. You can't agree to sell your children into slavery or anything like that, but you can do anything you want. The judge has to apply the law. That's their job. And if you go to trial, it's appealable. If you come to an agreement and you sign off on it, you know, now it's bound by contract law, and there's no appealing. You know, you file a settlement agreement, and that's it. The case is over. It's so much better for everybody involved. And one of the things I want to clarify is that you don't go into it without any protection in mediation. You can still hire a consulting attorney. If you want to have an attorney give you advice on what you should be looking for and review the agreement, we highly recommend you do that. So,
oh, that's really interesting. That's something that wasn't clear to me when I reviewed those materials on your website, which is, you know, it's party to party. It's direct mediation with the mediator without an attorney in many of the circumstances that you're describing.
Yeah, I mean, they can have the attorney involved if they want to, but a lot of people don't. It's really up to them. But I think a lot of people think it's either mediation without attorneys or I have an attorney and I litigate, like that those are the only two options.
I see.
But you can mediate and have a consulting attorney.
Got it. Yeah. No, I was wondering because in civil litigation outside the divorce context, oftentimes mediators and judges will talk about, well, are the parties ripe for mediation? So have the parties kind of fleshed it out enough so that a mediation would be productive, you know? And so some people think, well, if you do a mediation too early, you know, maybe you're being counterproductive. But I can imagine circumstances in the family law context where it might be beneficial to just do a mediation.
Well, we still require financial disclosure to mediate. So, and sometimes as part of and we only mediate it in 2-hour chunks at a time. So like we may mediate the financial issues on one particular day, and we may say, oh, you know what, we still need more information. We need to have the business appraised, or we need to have the house appraised, or whatever. So that's your homework, you know. And we do have preferred professionals that we work with. So we have a forensic accountant who gives our clients a better deal than they would normally get if they went directly to him. He reduces his rate slightly. And so he will be like a neutral and value the business if necessary. And then now we have a number for that. And so we can plug that into the spreadsheet, which, you know, we create an asset and liability spreadsheet for every single case and figure out who's going to get what. And, you know, it should be equal in the end of the day.
One of the things that you mentioned before the interview officially began was your, kind of the path that your father took, and kind of your relationship with your half brothers. Would you mind describing, your father's path, and how you came to get to know your half brothers in adult life?
Oh, sure. Well, my dad was an anesthesiologist. Well, I guess I should go back and say he was in medical school. This is maybe a longer story than you're looking for, but I feel like I should add some context. So my dad was in medical school when my grandfather died of a heart attack at 47, very suddenly. So when my grandfather died, the family lost their legal status here. And so because they were here on his merchant visa, and of course, there was still a lot of racism and prejudice at that time against Asians. And so they tried to deport my father, actually, while he's at Columbia Medical School. It's not like he's in prison or anything. He's at Columbia Medical School, and he's fighting deportation. And we actually have the congressional records where they stayed his deportation. They voted to stay it. But as soon as he graduated from medical school, he had to join the Navy. So he joined the Navy to get his citizenship, basically. While he was in Korea, so he was in the Korean War, he ran one of the hospital ships during the Korean War. And while he was in Korea, he had, my oldest brother was born. So, and then he had one other son with his first wife, who was also Chinese. In the 60s, I guess he met my mom. My mom was a operating room nurse. My dad was an anesthesiologist, and from what I understand, my dad's marriage was not happy to his first wife at the time, and he ended up leaving his first wife for my mother. And then, of course, later on I was born, and his first wife was not thrilled about that situation. My dad had always wanted a girl, and apparently his secretary, who was 50 years with him, used to tell me all the time all he ever talked about was wanting a girl. So I think that added to my dad's first wife's ire, and I never met her, so. But anyway, so she kept the boys away from my father. He was not allowed to see them. In my world today, we would call it alienation. She totally alienated them. And he used to tell me, you have brothers, but their mother won't allow me to see them. And one of my older brothers, I did tell him that one time, and I think he was very touched that I don't think he knew that I knew about them. I saw them a couple of times when I was very little at Chinese New Year events or whatever, but I didn't really get to know them until I was a little bit older.
And how did you reconnect?
I believe that my father did pay for them to go to college, and I'm not sure about law school, maybe so, I'm not sure. I know he bought my one older brother a car, I remember something about that. And I just think it was after they finished school, and they were no longer under their mother's control. After they finished college, they started to come around a lot more, and so I saw them much more after that. So we didn't grow up together. Well, I mean, they're much older than I am anyway. So
it must have impacted your father a great deal to be alienated from his two sons.
Very much so. I mean, I remember the first time, I very distinctly remember meeting Richard for the first time. Bobby was not with him. Richard might have been 15 or something, and I was maybe 5. but we were at a Chinese New Year thing, which we always went to downtown Chinatown, always. And there was this boy, he had all this photography equipment. He was taking pictures of the line dancing and everything. And he grabbed this boy and started hugging him and kissing his head. And I was like, what is he doing to this boy? Mm-hmm. And I could just tell that there was like this amazing emotion from my father about this boy. And then he turned to me and he said, "This is your brother." And I remember it so vividly because I was young. Mm-hmm. But my father was a very, pretty much emotionally controlled person. So I knew something was going on with that. So it's sad, but in the end, he was very close to all of us.
And what was it like, coming to know as a brother your two older brothers in adulthood?
I mean, for me, it was great. I mean, I'm very glad that we're all connected now. Definitely. It means very much to me. We were raised very close to our cousins, very close. And they were robbed of time with them as well. And a lot of my cousins are kind of mad about that because they didn't get to see them. My cousins are almost like siblings in some ways. Because, I think when you come over as immigrants, my dad's best friends were his brothers and sister. Mm-hmm. So we were all raised very close. So we're thrilled.
And how did your dad was attending Columbia Medical School at the time that your grandfather passed suddenly at a young age, 47? How is it that he got the attention of Congress such that they would vote to stay his deportation?
I don't know. I would love to know. My brother Richard, my older brother, he found this information and sent it to me and said, "Look, they tried to deport Dad, and he never spoke of it when he was alive."
Well, you don't have to answer this question, but it's something that occurs to me. We live in a particular historical moment that is not unique. These things tend to come and go in cycles, I believe. But we live in a historical moment where, some people in our country would make family-based immigration more difficult. And take a strict line and sometimes deport people who have served our country. Here I'm thinking about combatants in Cambodia and Vietnam, and who may have fallen afoul of the law, fallen out of status. There are even people who are stuck in a legal no man's land who were lawfully adopted as children but never naturalized by their parents. So we have these broad categories of who, in other times we might have thought of as Americans, who are subject to deportation.
It makes me very sad what's going on in this country right now. I'm embarrassed and ashamed of what's going on in this country right now. I'm going to get emotional when I think about it, frankly, because of what my family went through to be here, and especially, as they weren't even allowed to be here. The only prejudicial, racist law that's ever been on the books in this country has been against Chinese, Asians, but Chinese in particular. And so I feel like we're going backward now. It's deeply, deeply upsetting to me, deeply.
Yeah, and certainly the codification of race-based restrictions on immigration started with the Chinese Exclusion Act, and and it's I have to believe that a lot of it is fear-based, and a lot of prejudice is fear-based.
Of course.
Well, growing up in DC, I wonder what your personal experience was like, and whether the particular path followed by what some people call Hapa, or half Asian, half Caucasian Americans, it can be very, very different.
It was very difficult, very, very difficult. I thought it was very difficult, and I've spoken to other Hapas who've said the same thing. I looked much more Chinese as a child. People would ask me, why don't you have an accent when you talk? And they would call me names and whatever. I remember in 6th grade being teased for being Chinese on the playground, and I think that was part of my drive, because I remember sitting there, and the one thing my father did give me is so much confidence in myself, and my mother too. And I remember sitting there thinking, you guys are such losers. You're just such losers, and I'm going to show all of you how much you're a loser and I'm a winner. Like, I just remember feeling like that. I didn't ever think, oh, there's something wrong with me. I just remember thinking, there's so much something wrong with you. But it doesn't make it fun. It certainly wasn't easy to grow up like that. And I didn't know anybody else who was half Asian at that time other than my own family. It really wasn't until when I was a teenager. So my dad's best friend happened to be a guy who was Caucasian, but he had lived in China for a lot of his childhood for some reason. And so he spoke fluent Mandarin, and then they met at Bronx High School of Science. And he ended up being in the movie production industry and was friends with Eileen Ford. And so at 14, I called him Uncle Bert. He wasn't my blood uncle, but he was my dad's best friend. He wanted me to do this whole portfolio, because they were interested in me for modeling, because they were looking for that exotic look. That was the first time I ever felt like it was a good thing. It never felt like a good thing up until then. But then my father, of course, was, no way is my daughter doing anything like that. As soon as he found out, that was not happening. So that's why I never pursued that. But I think it was extremely difficult, because you're not one, you're not the other. I've heard many people say this, but it was really true. You're filling out the thing for the standardized testing and check a race, and you have no idea what to say, because you're both, and there's no option for both. And especially when you're exactly 50%, it's difficult, very difficult. I think it's easier today, but when my parents went to get married in the 60s, they were living in Northern Virginia outside of DC at the time. In Virginia, it was still illegal. It was still illegal for two different races to get married until Loving versus the state of Virginia overturned it in 1967. So they had to get married in DC. And these are my own parents. We're not talking about 100 years ago.
Yeah. Having grown up in the Midwest and in Michigan, I know that for growing up, it was very painful to be isolated in that way and to be singled out. My sister stayed in Flint, Michigan. I moved to East Lansing, and then to Columbus, Ohio, and then Pittsburgh. But for my sister, being in Flint and being really the only one of her kind in her school, I know she felt tempted to, as I did, to kind of distance myself from that identity, because it really brought grief to you as a child.
No doubt about it.
And I wonder what that journey's been for you, your dad instilled a lot of confidence in you. He also immersed you in Chinese culture to the extent possible. You went to Chinese school, but you were the only APAHM child there. Grew up in DC, but then you had the experience of moving to Miami for law school and being in Florida. I wonder what that path has been for you, that journey of identity.
I mean, it's gone from, my middle name is Yukong. I hated having that middle name as a child. Absolutely hated it. What does the Y stand for? I used to tell people it meant Yvonne or something. I would make stuff up. I'm so ashamed of that now, that I would actually not say, because knowing now my middle name is like, Yu is Jade, and that's my grandmother's name, and Kong was my generational name. It means health. My dad was a doctor. All of my brothers have Kong, and I have Kong in our name. I mean, there was so much thought and meaning put into that. It's like so sad that I felt that way, but that's what I felt like. I just wanted my middle name to be like Elizabeth or Marie, and I wanted to have blonde hair and just be normal. And so it started with that. It's funny, is I remember somebody saying on a Facebook thing that I posted, somebody I had gone to elementary school with said, "Oh, I bet you're still, you haven't changed. You're still cute, and I bet you're still funny," or something. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I sure didn't feel cute or funny. I felt nothing. I felt different than everybody else. I felt like I just wanted to kind of be a wallflower or something. I just didn't, it wasn't an awful childhood, but I certainly didn't feel like I fit in with everybody else, for sure. And it wasn't until high school where I started to get attention for the modeling and for, and then boys and all that sort of thing, that I started to think, oh, maybe it's not so bad to be half Asian after all, or whatever. And then it really wasn't until I became an adult that I started to really embrace my heritage and be proud of it.
I know one of the stories that you've told on your podcast and in some of your videos is how you got married at a young age, had 3 children, and then made the decision to divorce, and then you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. You finished your degree, wound up going to law school. That's a very condensed path, but I have to imagine for someone going through that at that moment in time, that it's not something that's easy to convey in like a 10-second description. So I wonder if you'd be willing to share kind of what it took really to be a young mom of 3 and to go through that.
Well, I graduated as the class salutatorian from high school. So I did very well in school because, I had Max Zung at home. But I think my version of rebelling was to get married at 19. My father was heavily pushing me to become a doctor, which I really didn't want to do. But being his only daughter, he really felt, I think he adored me. Bob will tell you that I was his favorite. I was definitely his favorite. He adored me, but he also was very, very controlling. I think that was just all he knew. And especially because I was a girl. And so he really wanted to dictate. I got into UVA. He wanted me to go to UVA. I'm like, I really don't want to be in the middle of Charlottesburg, but it's such a great school. And plus I won't have to pay so much in tuition and whatever. And he was just pushing me to do what he wanted. And I know he meant well, but I felt very controlled. And so I got married. That was my version of rebelling and getting out of that, what I felt was a regime at the time. Looking back, it was probably not as bad as I felt like it was, but maybe, I don't know. But to me, that was my feeling at the time. And so I got married, quit school, had 3 children by the time I was 23, and my father was just like, beside himself. He really didn't know what to do with me at that point. But he still called me every day. He called me every day until the day he died. And so, he was still involved, but not happy. So then I realized, this is kind of stupid. Like, I need to finish my degree. What was I thinking? What was I thinking I was doing? I don't know, but probably wasn't thinking at all. And so I finished my college degree when my older children were 3, 4, and 5. And then the marriage was not working out because I outgrew him. The more I became educated and the more I grew up, the more I outgrew this person that I thought was going to be great for me at 19. I realized wasn't so great for me. He's a very nice man and he's a good dad. So I don't want to disparage him, but he was not a life partner choice for me. And so I decided to leave him, and I just knew that I needed to figure out a way to support my children. So I went back to school. University of Miami had a law school program at night. I literally picked law because they took any kind of bachelor's. You didn't have to have a business degree or a particular type. They didn't care what kind of a degree you had. I had a degree in education. So I had been teaching school. I applied to law school, and I took the LSAT. I did well on the LSAT. I had a very good GPA from college, and so I easily got in, and I even got a scholarship from Miami, and I went to law school at night. I made law review, which I wasn't going to do, but I had a professor who said, no, this is something that's good for your resume. You should definitely do it. So on top of everything else I had to do, I had to now write these law review articles and edit law review articles, which was so much work. But I did it. And
you were taking care of your 3 children.
Taking care of the 3 children, working full time.
Were you teaching?
Teaching. Yep. So I went to, and I always say, and this is absolutely serious, like, I didn't plan to do so well in law school. It was just more like, I don't want to flunk out of law school. And so I just did as well as I could. And I happened to do very well because I was just striving to just not flunk out. And I would study from 10 to 2 at night. And then, just sleep like 3 hours a day. I was only in my late 20s at that point. So, I was still young enough to have like the energy to do all of that. And I met my husband in law school, and we have a daughter together now. She's 16. And that's what I did. But I'll tell you this, that, having been a divorce attorney for so long, I can really identify with single moms and people who are facing new lives with children, and I know what that looks like. I was able to do that and create this life. When I applied to law school, I could never have imagined that I would have the kind of success as an attorney that I've had. I just never imagined that I would have this life, ever. But, a law degree is a wonderful thing. It really can open a lot of doors. It was the best decision I ever made.
And so was your entree into family law, was that solely an accident because you happened to meet I think you said Victoria Ho?
Victoria Ho.
Yeah, and she happened to be half Chinese, and you found that affinity for her. So was that purely an accident?
Purely an accident. So her husband at the time was a judge who my husband was appearing in front of on a daily basis. My husband had gotten a job as a prosecutor, and he was the criminal law judge at the time. And so we went to a dinner for state attorneys or something. I'm not exactly even sure what it was for now. It's been so long. But I just went as, his girlfriend. We weren't even engaged, I don't think. And so we sat with them because my husband knew the judge. And so I just started talking to her, and it turned out we had actually so much more in common than that. Both of our fathers had been from Shanghai. Both of our fathers were anesthesiologists. Both of our mothers had been operating room nurses, and that's how they met. Our parents met. We both had 2 boys and a girl from our first marriages. I mean, it was like all this crazy synergy. And she basically asked me to come work for her, and I had actually planned to do more like business associations. I'd gotten a book award in law school for the business associations class. I had a lot of interest around that. And she kind of said, oh, my cases are so big, it's like dissolving corporations, and which is maybe 10% true.
Yeah.
Her cases were big, but it was a lot more involved than that, obviously. But
right.
But high net worth family law is a very, very highly specialized area of the law, because you really have to know a lot about business law, tax law, estate planning law. There's so much involved with it that it's not something that you could just go out on your own and do. A lot of people try to do criminal and family or whatever, and they just do like simple family law cases. High net worth family law is a very, very specialized skill, and I was very fortunate to be trained by the best, and so for me it was best to stay in that area.
I see. Well, I asked the question whether it was purely an accident because there seems to be so much, not sure what the right word for it would be, but kind of an integrity between your personal experience as I know it, kind of reviewing some of your materials, and the kind of path that you've taken in the law. So, and I understand from my own personal experience that one's choice and path in law can be an accident, but sometimes those accidents aren't purely accidents. There's kind of a natural draw.
I never, ever, ever thought that while I was in law school that this is what I would end up doing, but it's worked out well for me.
When you first started practicing, and the person you worked with, Victoria Ho, told you, "Oh well, it's just like corporations law," and you later found out it wasn't quite. Maybe 10% of it was. What was your reaction at that time, and why did you decide to stick with it?
What was my reaction at the time? Honestly, when I first started practicing law, I felt like drinking from a fire hose or just completely overwhelmed. I think a lot of new lawyers feel that way, but I especially did because we had such huge cases and they would only give me pieces of it. Mm-hmm. So I would just be doing the research for, the sexually transmitted disease battery claim, the civil battery claim, or I would be doing drafting a motion for exclusive occupancy or whatever. I mean, they only gave me these tiny pieces. And so it took me a long time, frankly, at least I thought a long time, several months before I realized what a case actually looked like from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that it really sank in with me like there wasn't some aha moment. I think that it was sort of over time I started to realize what all was involved. And as far as why did I stick with it, I think that one of the things they don't tell you in law school is that it's really hard to change direction once you've already picked a specialty, because you become known for that, you become more valuable for that. It gets harder and harder to move as an associate, and then certainly as a partner if you want to change completely, because people who hire in this profession, they look for, oh, this is a 7-year associate in estate planning. Mm-hmm. They don't go, oh, well, this estate planning attorney now wants to be a litigator. How do we, the legal world doesn't know quite what to do with that.
Right.
So I just think I stuck with it because that was what I did and what I knew, and I was good at it. I was good at it right out of the gate. So it was a natural place for me to stay. I've never practiced any other kind of law, so.
Well, when we met, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, one thing that struck me then, and doubly so now, having looked further into your work, is just how well and how much you and how effectively you embrace the marketing aspect of a legal practice. And that's something that stands out because, one, it's rare in any circumstance, but for the APA affinity organizations, one of the things that we teach our young attorneys to overcome is kind of a reluctance to engage in marketing your own brand, marketing yourself, and you've been so effective at it. I wonder what that journey has been for you personally, and whether it came natural to you or whether something that you had to kind of lean into.
I think it's probably both, and that's a good question, and thank you. I would say, funny enough, I didn't remember this until you just asked me this question. Victoria Ho was also very good at marketing herself. And I used to call her the Madonna of family law because she was really good at her marketing, The very first day I started at the firm, she handed me a book that was put out by the ABA called Women Rainmakers. I don't even know if it's still in print or they still do it anymore or whatever. But, and certainly it would be very different today because social media didn't exist in those days and all that. But she got me thinking of that right from the beginning. Think of yourself as a partner. Think of yourself as how you're going to generate business. And then her partner, John Asbell, who was also my first boss, was very good at saying to me right from the beginning, you're going to get referrals, and the first referrals that you're going to get for clients are not going to be clients that you want, because brand new attorneys don't get great referrals. And I remember he had gone to the Citadel. He was a steely older guy, had been in Vietnam, Southern aristocrat kind of a guy, and I remember him saying, Rebecca, you do a good job for your hairdresser. She'll send you all her hairdresser friends. Is that how you want to build a practice? And so I was trained and groomed from them right from the beginning on the long-term vision. How do you want to grow your practice? What do you want to look at? And Vicky, we called her Vicky, she used to say, every month, what are you doing? Is it, an article? Is it a talk? Is it, is it a networking event? You should be involved with at least one civic organization and one professional organization. So, I became president of the Women's Bar Association, and then I was also involved with the Boys and Girls Club. Just they got me thinking that way right from the beginning. But But I also think in some ways it's genetic, and my grandfather came from China in the late 30s. He died before I was born, but by all accounts, he was very charismatic, very entrepreneurial. He had a rug and fur business. He was able to come here during the Chinese Exclusion Act when it wasn't even legal for Chinese to come here, but he was able to get a merchant visa and bring his family here and escape the genocide that was going on in China at the time at the hands of the Japanese. And so, like, literally, according to my uncle, the boat was pulling out of the harbor and bombs were going off and things as they were leaving Shanghai in 1937. So.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Have you heard of Helen Zia's book? I haven't read it, but just came out. I think it's entitled The Last Boat Out of Shanghai.
No, I have to read that. The one that really, really was powerful for me was Shanghai Girls by Lisa See, because those two girls were teenagers. They were a little older than what my dad was when he came. My dad was about 14 when he came here, but it was set early on in 1937, and how describing Shanghai as the Paris of the East at the time, and how cosmopolitan it was and beautiful. And then when the Japanese started bombing it in 1937, it was just in ruins. And so my grandfather had already decided to go to the U.S. He was one of three brothers that they had a business together, and my grandfather was the youngest, so they sent him away. And so he was in New York. And then when the Japanese started bombing, my grandfather decided to bring the whole family over. So he saved his pennies, bit by bit, so that they could come over on the boat first class, because he knew that they would be interrogated less if they came first class, so that's what they did. My dad, his two brothers, my aunt, his sister, and my grandmother all came together.
And was their port of entry San Francisco?
Ellis Island.
Oh, I see.
Yes. So they actually went through the Panama Canal.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And then my grandfather designed a blueprint for the family that the boys would go to these schools. He had figured out that they could go to Bronx High School of Science or Stuyvesant. My dad and my one uncle went to Bronx Science. My other uncle went to Stuyvesant, these gifted public schools. How they got into these schools when they didn't even speak English, I don't even know, to be honest with you. But obviously they figured out they were smart enough to get into these gifted schools. And then my dad went on to go to Columbia undergrad and medical school.
Wow.
And my uncle also became a doctor. He was a psychiatrist, and he did the Zung depression scale, which is used still all over the world by every mental health practitioner, and eventually was bought by Lilly. And my other uncle became an architect, and he became partners with Buckminster Fuller, and together they did Stanford Medical School Library, the Library of Congress. My uncle was on Edward Durrell Stone's team, where they did this Kennedy Center and all kinds of really amazing things. So, and then their children, our generation, was very much groomed for success too, And my grandfather decided that they weren't going to live in Chinatown. They were going to live in uptown Manhattan. And, he just decided, like, this is how it's going to go. And then he ended up dying of a heart attack at 47. But my grandfather.
Your grandfather did. I see.
Yeah.
Well, how did, presumably your father is the one who related the path of your grandfather, and it's stuck with you to this day, and it's obviously, it's dramatic, and it sounds like it has the stuff of a good makings of a good movie. But why was it that story and the story of your family's path? Why did that? Why has that stuck with you? Because when we were corresponding, you mentioned that's one of the first stories that you mentioned, and that that you described it as a blueprint. For it to be a blueprint, it was obviously impactful. Why was it so impactful for you?
I guess all of us felt this certain pressure to measure up, and I have two older half brothers, both of whom are also lawyers. I have one younger full brother, and he has his MBA, but he's international entrepreneur. He was one of the founding executives for DoubleClick, and so I just think, my father. Well, I joke that in my house there were only 2 grades, A or flunk. Like anything less than an A. A was just acceptable. I don't know. I think a lot of Asians probably can relate to that. But, I just think it was just expected. It was just expected.
Rebecca, what makes for a meaningful life?
Creating love in your life. The first thought I had was that Beatles quote, in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And I don't mean just your spouse, but everywhere that you go. A lot of what I do is so that I can help as many people as possible. So, of course, family first, but then I think we're put on this planet to help each other. I think the only reason why we're here is to learn how to love and be loved. I am a very, very spiritual person, and I pray every morning, let my thoughts be your thoughts, let my words be your words, use me as a vessel in whatever way that I'm supposed to be used. You've given me many gifts. Show me how I'm supposed to use them.
And looking at the way you choose to use your time now, do you feel spiritually fulfilled?
Much more so in the past 2 years, since I haven't been practicing. I went really hard for a long time, and I did one trial last year, and it was fun. It was actually fun to do one trial and focus on one case. The client wanted me to fly. He flew me back there, paid for me to be there, and it was, great. And the right result happened. I won the case, but it was the right result for that child, and I felt like I did a good thing for that child. So I think I think your career can be your spiritual work. I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.